Well, friends, welcome. Today's presentation, as you know, is titled Behind the Scenes, Saving and Sharing Local History. As I mentioned earlier, for those who might have arrived late, this is part of the Zoom Time Knowledge free public education series hosted by the James Madison University Lifelong Learning Institute. Our special guest presenter today is Penny Imeson. Penny was raised here in Harrisonburg, earned a Master of Business Administration degree from the College of William and Mary with Beta Gamma Sigma honors. She has worked in various roles across the United States, including as an interior designer with a firm in New York City, at the shipyard at Newport News Shipbuilding, for a nursery school in Georgia, and as a small business owner in Harrisonburg. In 2011, Penny became the executive director of the Heritage Museum. That's a role which allows her to apply her business background while challenging her creativity and comfort zone. Penny says she's delighted to be back in the Valley and closer to her Rockingham roots. And Penny, I want to say we're delighted to host you today. So thank you for sharing your expertise with our learning community. I certainly hope you feel welcome. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you. Your microphone's muted, so please unmute yourself. And whenever you'd like to begin screen sharing, Sue and I are in the background. If anyone has questions or you're having problems with Zoom, just use your chat window. We're here to help make sure that you get fully connected. And Penny, I think everything's going to be great on your end. So I'm going to mute myself, turn off my video, but do know that we're here to support you however you need assistance.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. And I'm excited to see so many names that are unfamiliar to me in this lineup. I'm gonna try to share my screen and move you guys out of my view so I won't be distracted. And really looking forward to sharing a little bit about actually Rocktown history, the home of the Harrisonburg-Rockingham Historical Society. I know that Heritage Museum name will stick around for a bit, but we'll get to that in a moment. Rodney didn't say this, but I always like to give a full disclosure that when I was studying at Randolph-Macon Women's College, I studied math and German. And you did hear him say that I got an MBA at William and Mary. So is there a word that was missing in all of that experience? Maybe history. History, nonprofits, and fundraising. So these are all new roles that I have stepped into here. And I just am delighted because even though I love math, I think that what I really love is solving puzzles. And to me, so much of the history research that we do and discovering ways to share history is solving puzzles. So that just lines up really well. And I love both the business side of running a small organization, sort of small, and stretching my creativity. So that's great. I will share my screen because, oh, I've already done that. Great, all ahead of the game. So again, many of you know us as the Heritage Museum. Let's see if I can figure out how to talk and click at the same time. It's been over a year since I've spoken to a group, so thank you so much for your grace today. The Heritage Museum brand was what I was introduced to when I came to the Historical Society, and it's a lovely logo, but I realized so soon that museum does not incorporate everything that we do here. There is so much that goes on in our activities, our planning, our outreach, that early on a discussion began about the organization being more than a museum, and we started contemplating and conversations began. There was much deliberation, strategic planning, and everything that goes into that, talking to groups of people. But ultimately last summer, we introduced the Rocktown History logo, and that is now our doing business as name. You can imagine Harrisonburg-Rockingham Historical Society is a bit of a mouthful. And fortunately, I'm not on Twitter, but that would take up a lot of space. So the Rocktown History logo is just an exciting new way that we feel expresses more about what we are and what we aim to do. So first and foremost, we feel that This will connect our constituencies. Harrisonburg and Rockingham are two very distinct entities, but they have all emerged from a common source. By reaching deep into our past, we emphasize the whole community and continue to tell its evolving story. Rocktown history also helps to represent the many different ways we serve. In addition to our very large gallery space, our research and genealogy library, the bookstore, the welcome center, we have artifacts and archives that act as the community scrapbook or attic. In fact, some of these items are in the attic. In addition, Rocktown history reaches beyond the walls to partner in the community, publish local history, and provide student activities, pop-up museums, and much more. And also, we feel that Rocktown history helps us remain relevant. For over 120 years, the Historical Society, using a handful of different names and in different locations, has been the foundation for local history education and preservation. And so the fresh and simple name of Rocktown history puts the focus on our mission and helps to just represent the whole community. And we just feel that this new name, I've gotten so much great feedback from it, really will help to broaden our audience and build new membership and friends, partnerships especially. So we have a new vision that our communities find inspiration and connection in the rich histories of Harrisonburg and Rockingham. To me, inspiration and connection is just so important. Accessible local history builds community as our connections to each other are strengthened through shared stories and experiences. So essentially our mission is still to collect and preserve and share the rich history of our community, but now it's much more active and intentional. Connection is really sort of my key word, so to speak. Connection motivates me. I just want to build connections between our objects and our audience, connections for individuals who are trying to find branches on their family trees, connections between organizations, because truly when we work together in partnerships with other organizations, we're just building a broader and more extensive and more informative interpretation. And really at the end of the day, this is our tagline, life in the heart of the valley. The truth is that like any other business, we need to adapt and change and just to stay relative and bring in new resources. Because we, as you'll see, are a fairly lean organization and we have really high goals and so much fun here. But it's important for us to keep growing. I know that one concern people have asked me many times is, has the Historical Society gone away? No, that is still our foundational organization. And I wouldn't dream of messing with its long legacy. Another concern is how will people find us? As you know, we're here today in this digital space, and there are so many ways behind the scenes that we can digitally make sure that we leave the breadcrumbs so that when people are looking for Harrisonburg or Rockingham history or genealogy or museums near us, our name will pop up. So I feel very confident that we can move forward in a strong position. So one of the fun things was researching the history of the name Rocktown. And yes, it's primarily the name of Harrisonburg, or it often references Harrisonburg, but we're taking a little bit of historic license in saying that Rocktown may have preceded the name of Harrisonburg. And this quote from Francis Asbury, and with no disrespect to our friends in Stanton down south, but you can see that he references to proceeding on to Rocktown, a beautiful place. He felt himself stiff and weary and troubled with rheumatic pains, but sweet sleep was quite welcome. This is the earliest reference I have found to Rocktown in 1793. So again, it does not predate the establishment of Rockingham County in 1778, or the naming of the county seat of Harrisonburg in 1780, but it was, it's part of the historical record. So what I've learned is history is relevant. History truly matters. It helps us to tell a story, to make an argument, to encourage creative thinking and problem solving, and to explore the world around us. We believe that history can have more impact when it connects the people, events, places, stories, and ideas of the past with the people, events, places, stories, and ideas of today. The ideas that we are all sharing and exploring, and certainly in everything we do, we try to broaden our audience and talk to different people who may be visiting the museum or inquiring about the area. I find that advocating for history is imperative because it seems there's been such a strong emphasis on STEM education in recent decades that history seems to have been taken for granted. And I think it's very important that we continue to encourage students to look at the history. It helps us to compare and contrast themes, to build cultural awareness, to build compassion for people who may have a different point of view, and to open dialogue. I am all about presenting history in ways that will encourage people to think beyond their usual circumstances. And I don't know if you've picked up, but that little girl was sitting on a bar of soap, because this is actually my little soapbox moment. So I'm going to continue with that and suggest that maybe there is some science, technology, and engineering and math in this historical photograph of a soapbox derby in 1948. I can't remember if this is Franklin Street or Campbell Street. I think it was Franklin Street, but it could have been Campbell Street in Harrisonburg. And it's just one of the fun photographs that we have in our photograph archives here at Rocktown History. So I think my point is that history basically encompasses all of the fields of study, whether it's science, technology, engineering, math, art. It's all part of what we is actually termed social science. And there's a reason that we call it social science, and that's very similar to studying science. There's discovery, experimentation, and confronting evidence. What's actually most exciting to me, and in the role that I have, is the wealth of information and primary source material that is now available in this new digital age. Scanned archives, Google eBooks, and television clips are just a click away from you and the computer you're on today. We even have our own collections on an online site so that people can see artifacts and photographs and study the finding aids for our archives online. Historian Ed Ayers said that studying all these new digital means of study are like using a magnifying glass or a telescope to continue on the science theme. The magnifying glass could be all the little details that we're now able to find, or the telescope is the broader picture and themes. Instead of having to travel across the country, we can tap into archives there and learn more about how we're connected to different areas. One of my new focuses, other than the relevance of history, is civics, but I'll save that for later. So the organization here is a 501c3, so we are a nonprofit. We have a 12-member trustee board, and a lot of our history is on our website, rocktownhistory.org. So if you're interested in more about the meeting in 1898, where a bunch of people in Harrisonburg and people from the area got together to form the Rockingham Historical Society, there's some information there and a timeline of the growth and the changes of the organization. So I encourage you to explore more about that. On staff, we have me, I'm the executive director, and we have a wonderful administrator researcher named Margaret Hotchner, and a weekend manager. So this is a pretty lean staff. But what is essential to every nonprofit? The volunteers, certainly. The Historical Society has been a primarily volunteer organization over the decades and continues to rely on the volunteers that come together, and it's just amazing, all the work they do. They're at the front desk to greet people who come into the building or curious about tourism information. They work in our genealogy library. These gentlemen, well, all of these people have done decades of work in building our online databases and enhancing our unique files. The Genealogy and Research Library holds unique resources for family and local history research, and community members enjoy free admission to pursue family lines and historical interests. So that was a change we made a couple of years ago. We added Ancestry Library Edition and Fold 3. I mentioned the unique surname and subject files, and just shelves and shelves. These are the genealogy research shelves, just some of them compiled genealogies. We have different subject areas, and in fact, I'll mention later, post offices. I was surprised to find a new resource myself recently. The library is not just for Harrisonburg and Rockingham, but expands beyond the boundaries and certainly goes up towards Pennsylvania, because so many of our ancestors migrated from Pennsylvania and beyond. Since we are in COVID situation right now, the research is by appointment, but I know that it's been a little quiet, so I think that you would definitely find a spot. And we also have online research for hire, basically. Margaret does a lot of amazing research for people who they can't come in, or maybe they're just not that interested in doing the details themselves. But the research services are growing, and that's exciting for us. Volunteers also help in the galleries. And our program committee has been dormant. We're about to kick things off again with returning to our third Thursday talks. But we don't really have a gallery plan at the moment. We, a couple of years ago, started a guest curated exhibition schedule, and our initial curator was this gentleman here on the edge, Dr. Kevin Borg from James Madison University's History Department. He did an amazing program exhibition on the patent holders from Harrisonburg and Rockingham, and identified, I think, over 300 patents from the area. And we used the patent art as a way to tell the stories. And it was just remarkable. This is a sort of an untapped resource, and now it's been made available to the community. And it's just an interesting way to learn who was inventive, what problems they were trying to solve, how they were trying to make life easier, and especially the patent art itself was just beautiful. I also work with interns, collegiate interns, and some high school students who have really helped in contributing to the exhibition space, or even behind the scenes in marketing or collections organization and identification. I love to talk with these students and encourage them, because they are the future of public history. And you know, as we all know, sometimes we don't really appreciate our history until we're a little more mature, but these students are much more savvier than I am, and really have clicked with them much, much earlier. I sort of covered that. Volunteers also work for collections care. We have large storage spaces for our objects. I'm sitting in the archives today. We are constantly receiving amazing donations. Truly, the whole collection, I think, has been built from donations. I remember buying a small archive document for $10 off of eBay once, but I think that's all in 10 years. And I don't believe that there was really funding for acquisitions before. So a huge shout out to donors, as well as the volunteers who take care of everything. And last but not least, seriously, bookkeeping and data entry, there are opportunities and positions available today if people have some time on their hands and are organized about typing. And I should say that not all volunteers work in the museum itself. Some work can be done from home. So then we also have special events. These are members of our collections committee doing a quilt turning for a quilting group. Special events that tie in with events here in Dayton, like the Redbud Festival. I mentioned the Third Thursday talks. We're certainly hoping to get those up and running, but they'll be virtual for a while. And then, of course, we love having students come in, students of all ages, for field trips and group tours. And finally, I did mention books, so I just thought I'd say that we are building an online bookstore. The shelf is a little bit short at the moment. We have so many more books in store. Keep an eye on that. If you have not gotten your copy of Lucy Francis Sims, it is just an incredible resource for much more than, it's all around the life of Lucy Sims, but Dale McAllister did a remarkable job in researching life at Hampton Institute back in the day, or the growth of schools, or, it's just, I will be referencing this for many, many years to come, I'm sure. And then, as you can see, our love sign here in Dayton. This is on the property. This is the barn. When you see the barn outside, this is gallery space. So it's rather deceiving. If you haven't been here and you come up to the front door, you'll think it's just a small house, but it's much more. We also have a historic home on this side called the Cromer Trumbo House that is filled with the household items of Mary Etter Spitzer's family. Mary was a lifelong Harrisonburg resident. This is another volunteer who replaced our fence last summer. So landscapers, honestly, volunteers matter. We just can't thank them enough. So I think that one of the descriptions was what my roles are, talking about history through what I do. So I thought, well, what do I do? So these are typical business jobs and roles. And these are additional roles that are found in museums and nonprofits. And as you can see, I wear a fair amount of hats, but that's certainly not unusual in the nonprofit world. People help me so many ways, but if we added a few more volunteers, what a difference that would make. Oh yeah, these are, sorry, there we go. So what I really do is answer questions. It's so fun. It makes every day different. Even if you have a plan for the day, it's not necessarily what will happen. Whether it's a question from an email, a question from a Facebook post, a question from a staff member, a question for a newsletter article, so many questions, and it really keeps me on my toes. But this is how I do it. These are the essential tasks. Lots and lots of research. I have found that since we're not having our Third Thursday talks, that we had a void in content creation. And so I've hesitantly or reluctantly or I've been challenged, let's put it that way. I've enjoyed the work, but I am challenged to manage to build enough content to be more consistent. But I definitely love it. There's a lot of writing and editing and designing, no matter what format I'm using, or if it's a fundraising campaign letter, if it's a newsletter article, or if it's a social media post and exhibit design. So much to do that I could talk all day about the fun stuff, but let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that we have these collections. One question might be, why do we have these collections? And we can't keep everything, but we want to keep those items that help represent the community and how it has changed and grown over the past. But more specifically, excuse me, the collections hold our community memory. And each time we display or use an object or a paper, I feel we need to make a connection. And so I mentioned earlier that connections is my keyword. When I've spoken with interns in the past, I can say, well, here we have this object, but why? What does it mean to you? How does it tell us about the past? Just say, so what? And try to answer that question so that the visitor or the audience member isn't thinking, so what? Now, we may not always hit the nail on the head, but that's the anticipated outcome. By linking the past to the present through the artifacts, we can connect today's life to the past in a meaningful way. One of the opportunities for sharing history is our newsletter. It is a quarterly publication, and I will say that recent past issues are easily accessible on our website, rocktownhistory.org/newsletters. And we also have older issues in an online book where you can flip the pages and view them digitally that way. More recently, in this particular issue, when I mention content, I have to find inspiration for the content. And every month or every quarter, we have a listing of the new donations and acquisitions that have come into the Historical Society collections. And last summer, this envelope on the top was donated along with a little bunch of correspondence to Miss Florence Wyant of Roadside, Rockingham County, Virginia. And then more recently, we received a postcard on the bottom that is postmarked from Roadside, Virginia. And the question was, where was Roadside? And interestingly, this was a question that came up about 50 years ago or so when Dr. Francis Wayland, who was a historian who was a major historian here in the Shenandoah Valley, asked the same question. So it was kind of fun to run across that Roadside had sort of faded from memory before. And so now we're doing our best to make sure that we keep it in the memory and there will be a record in the future. I will digress just a moment to say that what is so fun to me about the research, and when I mention the puzzles, I'm sure you've heard people talk about going down rabbit holes, and I'm never quite sure where the research will take me. But in this case, I learned a lot about post office history. And for example, there may be some real stamp collectors and postmark identifiers, but there's a real history of the way the post office has organized and taken care of the mail. This one is particularly fun because you can see it doesn't have an actual postmark. It just says Narrows, Virginia, 1881. And the postmaster canceled the stamp by hand. On the postcard, unfortunately, we don't know the date of this postcard. I did find out that this was the first postal card design issued. I think it was 1874. The design continued, so that doesn't mean it was only in 1874. This cancellation stamp here is called a killer, and this is a Target stamp. You can sort of see that bullseye target, like Target stores use. But now we see Roadside. So the question was, where was Roadside? Who was Florence? What were people saying to her? There were so many avenues to explore beyond being sidetracked by post office history. So this is a 1903 Rand McNally Atlas, and you can see it lists Roadside here in the eastern part of Rockingham County. We don't see oh, here, yes we do. Elkton is right here. And we see Yancey, Island Ford, Almond, another name that's unusual, Verbena. These are all names that appeared significant in 1903 when Rand McNally was creating its map. The research that I uncovered shows that this is Beldore Hollow, which is the eastern part of Rockingham, south of Elkton, that abuts the same area that abuts Greene County. Right here is Conrad's store that still stands today, with a historic spot that was once a post office. Before Elkton was called Elkton, it was Conrad's store. And I think Mr. Conrad had been there a long time before the post office opened, but he had the post office, and so Conrad's store was a natural name for that post office. So over time, the postmaster switched, and he started using the roadside name. Roadside was a little community about a mile away, and so he used roadside, even though he was operating out of here, but then he moved the roadside post office there, and then it gets very confusing going back and forth. But eventually, I found an archive that shows the actual plat, the drawing of the post offices that were extant when this particular postmaster wanted to open a roadside post office clearly delineated down here in Beldore. So that's all a little bit confusing. It still confuses me, but the interesting outcome was I not only identified that roadside had been here and here, but also that, and Francis Wyant lived in this hollow. You can see the Wyant families down at the bottom of this map. So the Wyants were certainly significant family name. So that tied those two together. But then we realized, or I surmised, that this map was probably based off of post office names and not necessarily locations. Because the Yancey post office here is the Yancey post office there. And Swift Run. So be careful about your sources. You would think that Rand McNally would get it right, but how would they be able to scour the United States without a database of their own? So just fun facts behind the scenes. Sometimes all the time, I love to look at old historical newspapers and identify topics that might just be more entertainment than hard history. And in this case, this was a 1914 issue of the Daily News Record. And it was clearly half a page of all the excitement to come, getting us to go to the county fair next week. And I was just entranced. I'm very visual, and I was entranced by this advertisement and decided to look into who is this Charles Morrock? What was the death swing? Who was the well-known aviator who came? And just exploring through online resources, I came up with a pretty fun e-newsletter, or e-blast we call it, for our monthly messages. And just found out who Mr. Morrock was. I won't go into all of that because there's not time, but the remarkable thing was there really was a stunt. And this is not in our archive, I'll make that perfectly clear, but I did find contemporary evidence of that event and that skill and that death swing. So that's just some of the fun parts of creating content. We do use social media, Facebook and Instagram, and I often use recent acquisitions for the content because it is a challenge. And frankly, I find it to be the most demanding part of my job because I'm not willing to just take this picture of a license plate and post it and say, take a look at this license plate. I always feel like there should be a little more substance. But this was timely, a collection of inaugural souvenirs was donated at the end of the year, and I just thought this inaugural plate was remarkable and timely. So I tap into current events, genealogy. I looked up names. I was looking for a POW from the area, and I ran across Paul Miller. And in doing genealogy research, discovered his story, where he worked as a finance officer, and ultimately was buried at Oak Lawn Cemetery. Sometimes, again, maybe the holidays are a reason to do some research. And I was looking at the newspaper ads, and there was this little ad saying that Philip Morris's spokesman, little Johnny was coming to Glenn's Fair Price store. And it turns out we had photographs of that in our photographic archives. And so I just love the serendipity when I'm curious about something and I can find more layers of the story within our own collections. Other inspiration comes from random questions. Someone asked me where Depot Hill was because his ancestor reportedly lived on Depot Hill, and I had to do some investigating for that. But this is from the 1885 atlas, which I referenced before with the post offices. I love maps, and the 1885 atlas is just remarkable because it lists people, where they lived, where the businesses were, just incredible. So this is northern Harrisonburg, up near the grain mill, and there used to be an old home called Monticello, and there's still a Colacello, or I think here we say Colacello Street. And so this would be the Depot Hill, just up the hill from the depot. So now something new. It's new to me, I figure it's new to you. One of the most engaging posts I made was last summer, I believe, and I just happened, every now and then I'm just in the archives roaming around, and I will find a topic that I'm curious about. And we had this file on the Rockingham restroom, and I thought, well, what's a restroom? And I did some digging, and it turns out that in 1930, the group of demonstration clubs in the county pitched together and created this space on the second floor of the site building. And a hostess was paid, and women could come and have their lunch if they were working women or if they were traveling and just literally needed a restroom. This facility was available to them, and it continued on for quite a number of years. Eventually, they moved into the basement of the courthouse. So now I need to look into more of the social history of public restrooms and how they came about. And I'm sure it's related to women going out in cities to shop and needing a lot of space to take the opportunity to use the facilities when they had on long dresses and bustles and all that sort of thing. So things have gotten, it's interesting when you go into an old hotel and there's practically a parlor, and that's where this derives from. This is kind of fun. I was contacted by a woman from France who was interested in finding descendants of Emanuel Klingstein, who was a Harrisonburg resident and a soldier during World War I. Her family had taken care of him and nursed him in his illness. And so she wanted to share that story in some of the family archives that she had, including a letter from him to the family in later years, which was all in French, which I thought was really nice. And so we have been communicating, and Mr. Klingstein did not have any descendants, but there are other friends of hers in France who are interested in finding these Americans who came to their community. It was clearly very important to their history. And I've helped connect her with people in Massachusetts, researchers in Massachusetts. And just recently she said she has a new friend she'd like to introduce. Her friend is passionate about America and the American Aid War. He often refers to our American friends. And when I got that message, I really just sat still at my desk for about 10 minutes and thought, this we talk about history like it happened in the past, but when we think about our community memory and how individuals are connected, I'm being connected to these people in France because of the history of my country. It's, how shall I say this? I'm pleased to know that they still hold America in esteem. And it kind of gives me little goosebumps to think about the power that history has. And before I get back on my soapbox, I'll continue. Okay, so what are some of the things that Rocktown History wants to do? What is our vision? I've talked about wanting, the need to expand and the goal to expand and be more than just what's inside the building here in Dayton. Really, we do so much more beyond our gallery walls. This is just a snippet, a little detail of the Harrisonburg painting by Emma Lyon Bryan, showing Harrisonburg in 1867. We had some amazing photography done so that we can really zoom in and see the detail on this painting. So this is Old Town. This would be the Ott Street, Franklin Street area, Campbell Street. And this is the Virginia Quilt Museum. Asbury Church would be on this lot. And so if you're familiar with, downtown, we don't really have a good Q&A here, but this is what we refer to as the Thomas Harrison House, the stone home here. And I mention that because I have been part of a project to restore the Thomas Harrison House to essentially what it may have looked like from the beginning. And this is a clue that we have from a Civil War sketch artist who traveled with Sheridan in 1864 when he came down for that period that we refer to as the burning of the valley. And Taylor took his sketches, completed them, annotated them, and put them in a volume about 25 years after the war. And it's a collectible book now. We are fortunate to have a copy in our archives because Chaz Haywood from Rockingham County Courthouse donated a copy to the archives. It's amazing to read it. I know the public library also has a copy. It's an incredible resource. So the project downtown to restore the Thomas Harrison House and bring it back to its full glory when Thomas Harrison lived there was continuing for some while. There's some definite structural issues. Lots of study had to be done. But one of the studies took place, I think let's see. Oh, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a group of people coming to tour the Thomas Harrison House. So this is the facade as we see it today on Bruce Street. Just across the street, Asbury would be on this side, and the parking deck is back here. So the building has been open twice in the past several years, and people stand in line. People stand in line to just look around to see what's inside because it is a bit of a little history mystery. There are 2 levels upstairs, and then in the basement, there is a cellar. And this is the original fireplace. You can see how enormous that is. And here are 2 individuals standing next to a running live spring. So they built the house on top of this spring. And a few years ago now, excavation was done in the basement, and they tested wood samples and paint samples. And lo and behold, the home that we all thought was dated to about 1740, 1750 is probably 1789. So that created quite the buzz in the historical community. And, I recognize all of the Harrison descendants who were closely tied to this story. But to me, it certainly broadens the scope and opportunity of this project. The Thomas Harrison House is really more than that stone building. I'm trying to advance my slide. Here, this is around 1903. We can see the old carriage house. the stone building, and we can see the Hall House that was built in front around 1826. This was when Asbury was being constructed. So again, we can see this continuation of the architecture. So this is 1911, 1912. On the 1918 map, there's the Hall House, the Thomas Harrison House, and that little carriage house or shed. Eventually, a connector was built in here. So you can only enter the Thomas Harrison House from the Bruce Street side, and it's not connected. There's no door between these buildings, but they are all adjacent. It's one fluid line. Just another image, an image of the Hall House in the front. And then in the 1960s, this addition was made. And I don't know if anybody remembers Service Stationers, but this pencil hangs in our gallery today. Service Stationers moved to the corner of Mason Street and Market Street at some point, and that's where I used to buy my school supplies. So I just love that pencil. There was a fire, so the top of the Hall House was burned down. But this is my poor, trying to create a seamless picture of the Thomas Harrison House as it is today, or the whole entire complex. So the original vision for this project was to tear down a portion of the house so that we could see the facade of the original Thomas Harrison House. That is still an option. And this portion of the building would remain. And I am very hopeful that that Rocktown history will have a downtown satellite space someday. I do want to point out that this is our 18th, 19th, and 20th century history all on one block, which is quite unique. And even if Thomas Harrison never lived in this house, it is remarkable that the house, he definitely gave the land for this property. He may have, it must have been family land. Just this continuation of history is really inspirational to me. I think we could tell so many stories, and I hope that we will find a way to do that without losing more of the footprint. All right, so what's next? Another exciting project that I'm really looking forward to. It's the foundation of a couple of fundraisers that we have this spring. Obviously, as a nonprofit, fundraising never ends. And I wrote a grant to the city, a request to the city for some funding for a project that would, that's based on the federal courthouse. Since I'm talking about fundraising, I should say that thanks to some very generous members and donors last year, as well as some COVID-related grants, we are starting the year in a strong financial position. And that takes some of the pressure off, but it certainly doesn't fund an entire year of programming. Back to my civics soapbox. Our goal is to encourage the public to use this historical thinking skills to actively engage with and discuss contemporary issues, and to recognize the value of history in its relevance to modern life. I talked before about civics being one of my goals, and the federal courthouse story is really a remarkable opportunity. Harrisonburg had a pivotal role in Virginia's history of massive resistance, which is the anti-desegregation of the schools. At the Harrisonburg Federal Courthouse in 1956, Judge John Paul handed down the first of many historic decisions which ultimately ended school segregation across the state. The case study offers an empowering lesson in history and civics, and the topic celebrates Harrisonburg's role in confronting unfortunate history and is relevant today as we continue to reckon with the legacy of a Jim Crow past. Our goal is to raise funds to create a short documentary that complements other local civil rights YouTube videos that you could find today The social studies coordinator in Rockingham County is a member of my board of trustees, and he is very proactive about having students study local history. And he is just one of those once in a lifetime educators and a delight to work with. Lots of enthusiasm. And he has had students traveling to Farmville and uncovering the story of Farmville and the Moton School's contribution to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. He also had students create a video on the Ewell family, an African-American family who moved from Farmville to Harrisonburg and were the first students to integrate at Eastern Mennonite School. So he has some great ideas. The vision also will include exhibitions panels for display in Harrisonburg, and we hope to have a debut event. I don't know if anybody tuned into our Lucy Francis Sims biography unveiling, but that was quite an exceptional evening and quite inspirational. So this story is the foundation for that grant, as well as the upcoming Great Community Give. The Great Community Give is coming up in April, and it's a day of community giving. Nonprofits from all across Rockingham County will join and to encourage online giving that day. Projects are more, did I mention that we intend to work with students? I want to underscore that fact. When we are talking about our history projects now, we definitely want to be working with students of all ages, I'll say, in order to develop fuller and richer programs. And as I mentioned before, we rely on volunteers. Our guest curators do receive honorariums now, and I've also applied for money to have stipends available for people and students who are doing research for us, because we need to recognize the value of what they do and encourage them in the profession. So students will get an opportunity to research and conduct interviews and make the documentary, hone their writing skills, study history, civics, art, and project management. So I hope that you'll consider saving that date and supporting that effort. So basically, I hope oh goodness, that ran a little long. I thank you so much for listening to me talk. This has been a wonderful opportunity. Here's my email. I would love to hear from anybody. If you have ideas, if you'd like to volunteer, if you have questions beyond this program. But our website is rocktownhistory.org. I think it's very easy for you to find, and I encourage you to look around. We are about to make a new set of improvements to it, and then we'll be able to upload much more data. So I'm excited about that. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the peek into some of my activities, and I encourage you to join, to visit. I will say it's quite safe these days because it's very quiet in the galleries, and they are large. And of course, we'd love you to have you volunteer. So normally I say I'll see you in the galleries, but perhaps I'll see you on another Zoom soon. Thank you.
Well, Penny, thank you for your presentation today, and also want to thank you for your work to keep local history alive and make it accessible to the public. We have 3 questions already queued up in the chat window. I'd like to read those to you for response, and then we'll open it up by allowing people microphone access. So the first question comes from Kathleen. Kathleen asked, what kind of interactions and collaborations do you have with the JMU Library Special Collections Group?
I could answer that a few ways. I went to an auction once. Remember I said we had never purchased anything, and I was encouraged to go to an auction and purchase an account book. And the special collections ladies were there, and that was the one and only time I bid, and I did not win. But I felt, I was very much relieved because they do amazing work over there, and I was mostly concerned that I didn't want this archive to leave the community. So we know it's safe. We actually coordinated a few years back on a program at the library, and we're happy to do that. They do have a wonderful local history. They have wonderful local history resources there, including some of the Historical Society's documents. I think that many years ago, they were put on hold, so to speak. They were, I don't know, it's a temporary thing for our collection to be there, but it seems to be more permanent than temporary. So we are definitely friendly with those women. They are always helpful when I have questions. And I just wish I had more time to get over there myself.
Penny, another question comes from Mary, who would like to know if the Inventors, Inventions, and Patents presentation exhibit is still available.
Unfortunately, it's not. That was in our rotating gallery, but just recently I have had part of the permanent galleries painted, and I didn't mention that a new focus that's more long-term is gathering a comprehensive local agriculture history story, which will also allow us to talk about immigration. So in the meantime, before that wall becomes agriculture, I have spoken with Kevin Borg, who installed that patent exhibit, about bringing back some of the patent information so that we can continue that story. Because really, it does make me sad when the exhibits come down and they're not always available in catalog form.
I have another quick question from Pat. Pat asks, are Rocktown History, the Heritage Museum, Harrisonburg Historical Society, and Remembering Downtown Harrisonburg all part of the same organization?
No. So Remembering Downtown Harrisonburg is an independent Facebook group, and if I really wanted to spend a lot of time, I would be looking at that every day. The Harrisonburg-Rockingham Historical Society is the umbrella organization that I work for. At times, it has been called the Shenandoah Valley Heritage Museum and Research Center, the Shenandoah Valley Folklife and Heritage Center, just the Historical Society. When I mentioned when I started, it was the Heritage Museum. So I think that there's always been this effort to sort of draw people in with a different name other than Harrisonburg-Rockingham Historical Society. So we are sort of set aside the Heritage Museum name, and now we use Rocktown History. But the Harrisonburg-Rockingham Historical Society is still the umbrella organization.
All right, thanks for that clarification. There's one more question, and I have enabled microphones. So after this question, people can join in with any comments, any questions that weren't in the chat window. But you mentioned having a bookstore. And this question is about, do you have recommendations about a good history of Rocktown or Harrisonburg? We have a lot of participants who relocate to Harrisonburg. Where should they start? What might you recommend?
I mentioned Dr. Wayland, and Dr. Wayland wrote a book on Rockingham County history. He also wrote a book on Harrisonburg history. So that, if you are interested in all the broad topics, I would start with that. There is a smaller publication called My Recollections of Rocktown that was annotated by Dr. Wayland. A woman named Maria Graham Carr, in her aging, sunset years, wrote down her memories of life in Harrisonburg and at that time. And so she mentions a lot of places that no longer exist or people you may not be familiar with. At some point in time, Dr. Wayland went through and updated, but now that is outdated. And I would love to have the opportunity, it's sort of on my wish list, to rebuild that story, share it again, but with a fresh new update. And another volunteer opportunity.
And I did enjoy, Penny, learning about the volunteer opportunities. As people contact our office looking for ways to meaningfully engage with the community, whether it's lifelong learning or a program like Rocktown History, when they express a deep interest in local history, or we see that in their registration record, we'll certainly try to make those connections to put people in the best possible position with something that they're going to enjoy, and certainly a way to give back to the community.
That would be great. I don't know that I specifically called it out, but when we receive these collections, the information needs to go into our database. And we have wonderful volunteers. In the past year, they're not always comfortable coming into work, and so we have a bit of a backlog. And going through and helping to enter the information for the more recent sessions is an opportunity, but even just going through and helping with our typos or developing better descriptions, because as you can imagine, as technology has changed, some things that were saved one way and then saved again, and now you have more storage space, and it's you can see an evolution in technology just in our database.
Yeah, and it's great to see if people missed the first portion of your presentation, that you're there in the archives. That's what we're seeing behind you. That's not a virtual background. That's the actual archives where Penny's presenting from today. At this point, your microphones are live. If you'd like to unmute yourself, questions, comments, feedback for Penny. Maybe you know Penny just from other interactions, so you can say hello if you'd like, but I am going to pause and just give you a moment. If you'd like to speak, just unmute your mics and we will quietly wait for your response. Well, Penny, not hearing any, again, I want to thank you for your time with this presentation, preparing and presenting today. As you've mentioned, it's good to be connected, to have this time together, even virtually, I heard in your presentation opportunities to volunteer, opportunities to learn about your own family history, as well as local history if you're a new resident, and opportunities to contribute to a collection. If you have an artifact that you might think might have value to the public, perhaps Rocktown history is a good place to inquire about it living on forever. So we appreciate all of those, all of that information and all the information that you presented. And for everyone still connected, I want to thank you for attending. We hope that you'll be with us again next week on Tuesday. Zoom Time Knowledge returns. We will be hosting Dr. Chris Burnson. He is a JMU professor who will be talking about COVID variants and vaccine development. And as always, you can register online at our website, www.jmu.edu/LLI. Until then, everyone take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, Penny. Bye, everyone.